This is a story about a land where a single day's climb up one slope can take you through 5 climate zones. About a place where every fourth plant grows nowhere else on the planet. Not in the Alps, not in the Urals, not in the Carpathians. About mountains that biologists count among the 25 principal points of life on Earth, and at the same time, among the most vulnerable. About a land that still remembers what it was before humans arrived. These mountains are some 25 million years old, young by geological standards, and still growing by a few millimeters every year. That has been enough for every fourth plant here to become unique. Enough for a European bison weighing a ton, completely wiped from the face of the earth in the early 20th century, to be brought back. Enough for the Persian leopard, nearly gone by the 90s, to give birth to a cub in the wild for the first time in decades. Here lives the bezoar ibex, the ancestor of every domestic goat on Earth. Here sings the Caucasian black grouse, found nowhere else. Here above the ridges glides the bearded vulture, a bird with a wingspan of nearly 3 meters, the only creature in the world that feeds entirely on bones. On the alpine meadows, the blue gentian opens with such intensity that the color looks painted. And in the Colchic forests, boxwood that survived the Ice Age and had stood for 300 to 400 years was destroyed in a few years by a single, accidentally introduced moth. Elbrus loses glacier over a century, and rivers receive less water in summer. The altitude zones are shifting upward, and for those living at the very top, there is nowhere left to go. What matters more, to preserve what has already nearly disappeared, or to learn to live in a way that makes disappearance stop? How much more will we manage to learn about this land before it ceases to be what it once was? The nature of the Caucasus exists in spite of wars, borders, poaching, and time. Listen, this story is about how little remains and how much can still be saved. What if a single day's climb up one slope can take you through climate zones separated by 1,000 kilometers on the plains? In the Caucasus, this is not a line from a tourist brochure. It is literal geography. But why here? Why did this particular patch of land become so biologically dense? The answer lies in the mountains themselves, in their age and their origins. The Greater Caucasus Ridge stretches kilometers from the Black Sea to the Caspian. By geological standards, it is young. It rose some million years ago, when the Arabian Plate began pressing against the Eurasian. Growth has not stopped. The ridge is still gaining a few millimeters each year, which is slow by human standards and rapid by geological ones. Elbrus is a twin-peaked dormant volcano standing 5,642 meters, the highest point of Russia and all of Europe. Its glaciers feed rivers running to both the Caspian and the Black Sea. Kazbek is another volcano with a different character at pin 107 meters. Both stand in clouds for most of the year and are visible from 10 kilometers on clear days. The Caucasus Mountains have stood here long enough for species to develop that are found nowhere else on Earth. This is endemism, when a biological species evolves in isolation long enough to become unique. The Caucasus counts more than 6 species of plants, and around 1,500 of them are endemic. Every fourth plant you will encounter in the Caucasian Mountains grows only here, not in the Alps, not in the Urals, not in the Carpathians. The Caucasus is an island of evolution in the middle of a continent. For evolution, 25 million years is enough for every fourth plant to become unique and found nowhere else. And since mountains are islands, each of them has its own face. To the west stand forests that no longer exist in most parts of Europe. The Western Caucasus, Krasnodar Krai, Adygia, Karachay-Cherkessia, is first and foremost forest. The kind of forest that most of Europe no longer knows. In the Caucasian Biosphere Reserve, the largest in the North Caucasus, beech groves of several hundred years of age have been preserved. The beeches there are so vast that 3 people cannot reach around a single trunk. Under the closed canopy, it is dark at noon. The leaf litter on the ground is nearly half a meter deep, soft and springy. In this silence and half-darkness exists a world that looks the same as it looked here thousands of years ago. An animal weighing a ton was completely wiped from the face of the earth and brought back. The last wild Caucasian European bison was killed in Adna Tesacha Debiatsot Dvatsat Sim. The ones grazing here now are descended from several dozen zoo-kept individuals that survived the 20th century. Hybrids with the American bison were used in restoration, so the correct name for the animal is Wisent bison. Biologically, this is a compromise, but a beast weighing a ton is again walking across the Caucasian meadows, and that is better than its complete absence. But the Wisent bison is not the only story of disappearance. Closer to the sea stands another tree, and it has a different, even more rapid story of destruction. The Black Sea coast of the Caucasus, Sochi, Abkhazia, Western Georgia, is a place that most people see as a resort strip, without thinking about the nature behind the beaches and hotels. But the nature there is extraordinary. The Colchic forest, the name given to the humid, subtropical forests on the eastern shore of the Black Sea, is a relic. It existed here before the last glacial maximum and survived the glaciation because the mountains sheltered this narrow coastal corridor from the ice sheet. When all of Europe was covered in ice, trees were growing here. After the glaciation, they went nowhere. They simply stayed. In the Colchic forest grows the boxwood, a tree with wood so dense it sinks in water. Boxwood groves in the ravines look like something from a different climate zone. Massive moss-covered trunks, interwoven branches, beneath which there is almost always half-shadow and moisture. Some boxwood trees in the Abkhazian forests had lived for 300 to 400 years. Had lived because in 2012, the box tree moth was accidentally brought into Russia, a butterfly from East Asia whose caterpillars eat boxwood. Within a few years, the moth destroyed most of the boxwood forests of the Black Sea coast. A forest that had survived the Ice Age was destroyed in a few years, not by axe and not by fire, but by a single species of insect accidentally introduced from Asia in due 2026. Centuries-old groves became bare branches. This is one of the most rapid ecological disasters in the history of Russia's natural world. Higher up the slope, living nature is still in bloom. In May, something happens here that is worth climbing the mountains specifically to see. Pontic rhododendron on the Caucasian slopes is an experience difficult to describe to someone who has not seen it. The shrub blooms in May and June, and when it blooms, mountain slopes for many kilometers are covered in pink and purple. You walk out of the forest onto an open slope, and before you is a wall of rhododendron at head height, entirely in flower. The scent is heavy, sweet, slightly intoxicating. Bees produce on these flowers a special honey containing toxins from rhododendron nectar. In large quantities, it causes poisoning, and this was known as far back as antiquity. The Caucasian tur, a wild goat that lives only here, is the principal animal of the rocky zone of the Greater Caucasus. The West Caucasian tur and the East Caucasian tur are two separate species inhabiting opposite ends of the ridge and meeting in its middle section, where they can interbreed. The tur seems to be a creature that refuses to acknowledge the laws of physics. It walks across vertical cliffs with no visible support, leaps across crevices several meters wide, and climbs vertical walls with ease. Its hooves are designed like natural mountaineering equipment, a hard, sharp edge for gripping rock, and a soft, elastic core for shock absorption. During the mating season, males clash horns with such force that the sound carries the length of the gorge. The chamois in the Caucasus is a small, graceful animal with slender legs and hooked horns. It is smaller than the tur and occupies a different niche. It stays primarily in the forest and subalpine zone, where the tur prefers open cliffs. The chamois jumps no worse, from a standstill several meters vertically, from ledge to ledge, faster than the eye can follow. In winter, it descends to the forest zone, where the snow is shallower and food is easier to reach. In summer, it goes high into the mountains, where most predators no longer reach. But it is not only herbivores that define the character of these slopes. Somewhere on the same cliffs lives a predator that has almost disappeared here and which is now being returned. The Persian leopard, also known as the Caucasian leopard, was virtually wiped out by the mid-20th century throughout the region, in Russia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Armenia. By the Adna 1990s, only a few dozen individuals remained across the entire Caucasus, and possibly fewer. Then reintroduction programs began. Several leopards from zoos and from the Iranian wild were released into the Caucasian Reserve. The first cubs born in the wild from reintroduced animals appeared a few years ago. A tiny success in an enormous undertaking, but the leopard is slowly returning to the mountains from which people had driven it. This story repeats itself with different species across the Caucasus, but each country has its own species, its own forests, its own losses, and its own hope. Georgia occupies the southern slopes of the Greater Caucasus and part of the Lesser, and surprises even those who know the region well. In the west of the country lies the Colchic lowland, swampy forest by the sea with vines and ferns at head height. In the center is the Borjomi Gorge, deep, with dark conifer forest and mineral water springs. In the east is Kakheti, with oak and hornbeam forests, transitioning into dry foothills. On the border with Azerbaijan is the Lagodeki Reserve, one of the most pristine corners of the entire South Caucasus. In northern Georgia lie Svaneti, Tusheti, Kevsureti, highland districts that are still difficult to reach, and it is precisely this inaccessibility that has preserved their nature. The Svan forests, spruce, pine, fir stand so densely and so tall that in broad daylight it feels as though evening is already falling. Beneath them, ferns and bilberries, moss on every stone, mushrooms on every log. Bear is an ordinary inhabitant here. Wolves walk between villages. Lynx hunts roe deer in beech groves lower down the slope. This is not a nature reserve or a national park in any formal sense. Simply an inaccessible forest that has survived precisely because it is hard to reach. The Colchic forests of western Georgia and Abkhazia in winter are a paradoxical place. It is warm by mountain standards, humid, and even in January there is green in places. Ivy covers tree trunks from roots to crown. The evergreen cherry laurel stays green year-round. This is a refugium, a refuge that sheltered life through the ice ages and continues to preserve it now. Plant species that disappeared from most of Europe in the Pleistocene are alive here, a living museum of evolution with an open door. Armenia occupies part of the Armenian highland, a volcanic plateau at around 1,500 to 2,000 meters above sea level. Dry, open, windy, a completely different character from the humid Western Caucasus. Lake Savan, a vast, high-altitude body of water at nearly 9 meters above sea level, is one of the largest in the world at such elevation. Its water is blue and cold, warming only near the shores in summer. On its shores nests the Armenian gull, a species living only here and nowhere else on the planet. A bird that became a separate species over a millennium of isolation on one lake. In Azerbaijan, at the eastern end of the Caucasus, the mountains transition toward the Caspian Sea. It is here in the Talish Mountains in the south of the country that Caucasian nature meets Iranian. The Harkanian forest, a relict deciduous forest with ironwood, persimmon, and vines, is one of the most remarkable in the region. The ironwood, Persian Perodia, has wood of such density that it does not burn in an ordinary fire. Its bark peels away in patches like a plane tree. In the Harkanian forest grow species that once covered much of Eurasia in the pre-glacial period. They survived here for the same reason as the Colchic forests. The mountains sheltered them from the glaciers. The Kura River, the principal river of the South Caucasus, rises in Turkey, flows through Georgia, then through Azerbaijan, and empties into the Caspian Sea. Along its banks lie riparian forests, marshes, and reed beds. In the Kura wetlands near the Caspian nests the Dalmatian pelican, a large bird with characteristically curly feathers on its head. Also present are the pygmy cormorant, spoonbill, and glossy ibis. This is one of the most important ornithological districts in the entire South Caucasus. Migratory birds from Siberia and Kazakhstan stop here on their way to Africa and South Asia. The autumn migration of raptors over the Caucasus is a phenomenon that few people know about. Raptors use thermal updrafts above mountain ridges to fly south with minimal energy expenditure. Above certain passes, the Batumi Pass on the Black Sea coast and the Derbent Pass on the Caspian, thousands of birds concentrate: eagles, hawks, falcons, honey buzzards, black kites. They move in streams, sometimes thousands per day. On a good day in Batumi, several tens of thousands of raptors can be counted in a few hours. This is one of the largest concentration points of migratory raptors in Eurasia, and it sits directly above the city. To the north of the ridge, where altitudinal zonation compresses all climate zones into a single day's climb, another story begins. The Lesser Caucasus is a mountain system south of the Greater Caucasus, running through Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Less well known but no less interesting. Here are volcanic plateaus, mountain lakes, steppe areas at 12 meters. And here lives the bezoar ibex, the ancestor of every domestic goat in the world. This is not poetic exaggeration. Genetic studies have confirmed that it was precisely the bezoar ibex that was domesticated in the Middle East some years ago. A wild goat with long saber-shaped horns walks the same cliffs its ancestors walked long before humans appeared. It is cautious. Hearing a sound, it freezes and watches, then in a fraction of a second decides to hide or to run, and runs across the cliffs in a way that no vehicle can follow. Elbrus in winter is not simply a mountain, it is a climate-forming feature. Its ice cap, covering around square kilometers, reflects sunlight and cools the surrounding air. It feeds the Kuban and Baksan rivers, which flow in different directions from the mountain. In summer, the glaciers melt. The rivers run full. In winter, they freeze at their headwaters. But the Elbrus glaciers are retreating. Over the last years, they have lost a significant portion of their volume. This means that rivers will receive less water in summer. Mountains store water in the form of ice, and when the ice goes, the water goes with it. In the Caucasus operates a principle with no equivalent in Eurasia. For every meters of ascent up a slope, nature changes as drastically as it does over kilometers of movement northward across the plains. This is called altitudinal zonation, and nowhere is it expressed as sharply and beautifully as here. In a single day's climb from the Black Sea coast, you will pass through 5 climate zones, beginning in the subtropics with magnolias and palms, ending on a glacier where snow never melts, and between them, everything else. Above the trees, another world begins, where grass serves merely as a backdrop for flowers, and where lives a cat that was long thought to have disappeared forever. The alpine meadows of the Caucasus, at elevations of 2 to 3 meters, unfold before the arriving visitor as something whose first reaction is disbelief. A continuous, dense carpet of flowers, primrose, gentian, Caucasian fritillary, orchid, harebells, covers every square meter. Not individual flowers against a background of grass, but an unbroken flowering canvas in which grass serves only as backdrop. The color changes depending on elevation and slope aspect. One set of species on the south-facing slope, another on the north, still others at the edge of a snowfield, ones that know how to live almost at the very ice. The gentian in the Caucasus is blue with such intensity that at first it seems painted. Such saturated blue is rare in nature, and this is not an exaggeration. The gentian is used as an indicator of alpine meadow health. Where it grows abundantly, the meadow has not been overgrazed, trampled, or disturbed. Where it is absent, something has gone wrong. It requires a specific soil composition, specific humidity, specific elevation, and any deviation causes it to disappear. In this sense, the gentian is a living sensor of ecosystem health. The snow leopard in the Caucasus was for a long time a subject considered closed. It was officially declared extinct here in Soviet times. But reports kept appearing, tracks, indirect signs, accounts from local residents. In the 2002, camera traps in the Caucasian Reserve and across the Western Caucasus began recording something resembling a snow leopard, and then the first reliable photographs appeared. It is now believed that a very small population exists in the Greater Caucasus, possibly a few dozen individuals, possibly fewer. There are no precise figures. The animal is too rare, too secretive, too difficult to access for study, but it is there. The brown bear of the Caucasus is one of the largest in Eurasia. The Caucasian subspecies is larger than the Central European and comparable in size to the Far Eastern. In summer, the bear lives on alpine meadows, eating grass, roots, berries, and insects. In late summer, it descends to the forest zone toward berry patches and fruit orchards. In autumn, it eats acorns, beech nuts, wild pears, and apples, building up fat before hibernation. The Caucasian bear is omnivorous in the broadest sense. Its diet includes more than 100 plant species and several dozen animal species. In a good harvest year, it barely eats meat. There is no need to expend energy on hunting when beech nuts lie right underfoot. The wolf in the Caucasus lives everywhere, from the foothill steppes to the alpine zone. Its relationship with humans here is more fraught than in most other regions, because mountain pastoralism remains a traditional way of life, and a wolf attacking a flock of sheep is not an abstraction, but a concrete economic problem for a specific family. This conflict exists everywhere that large predators and livestock share territory, but in the Caucasus it is especially sharp. The traditional pastoral way of life has survived here, where in the rest of Europe it long since disappeared. Solutions that work elsewhere do not work here. The context is too specific. The Eurasian lynx in the Caucasian forests hunts roe deer and hare. It is present wherever there is dense forest and sufficient prey. In the Caucasian Reserve, in Borjomi Gorge, in the forests of Armenia, in the Talish Mountains. Its tracks are found regularly. The animal itself is rarely seen. It is active at dusk and at night, moves silently, and prefers to remain unnoticed. The lynx is an indicator of forest ecosystem health. Where it is absent, as a rule, either the forest is gone, or the prey is gone, or there are too many people. Its presence says the forest is alive. The Caucasian roe deer is a small deer that is considerably more common in the Caucasus than is generally thought. It lives in the forest zone from the foothills to the subalpine, feeding on young shoots, leaves, acorns, and berries. In summer, the roe deer climb high, sometimes to 2 million meters, escaping the heat and insects below. In autumn, they descend. Their migrations are vertical, not horizontal, up and down the slope, not sideways. The fundamental difference from plains animals, all life is organized vertically. The Caucasian red deer, the Maral, fares well enough in the nature reserves. In the Caucasian Reserve, there are several thousand of them. In autumn, during the rut, the males bellow in the forests, and in mountain gorges the sound carries for several kilometers, bouncing off the slopes, arriving from several directions at once. In the subalpine zone, the bellowing of a deer is heard with particular clarity. There are no trees to absorb the sound, only mountains, meadows, wind, and this voice that seems to issue from the mountains themselves rather than from the animal. From the mountains to the water. Two seas on opposite sides of the ridge live by entirely different rules. The Black Sea coast is not only subtropical forests and resorts, but a sea that lives by its own particular rules. The Black Sea below 200 meters is filled with hydrogen sulfide. There is no oxygen and almost no life. All biological activity is concentrated in the upper 200 meters. In this narrow layer dolphins hunt. Three species inhabit the Black Sea: the bottlenose dolphin, the common dolphin, and the harbor porpoise. The bottlenose is large and intelligent, hunting near shores, sometimes entering river mouths. The common dolphin is smaller and faster, hunting anchovy in the open sea in large groups. The harbor porpoise is the smallest and most cautious, rarely showing itself at the surface. The anchovy, a small fish of around centimeters, is the foundation of the entire Black Sea ecosystem. It filters plankton and itself serves as food for everything else: dolphins, tuna, bluefish, and birds. When anchovy gather in shoals to spawn, this is visible from the air, dark patches a few hundred meters from shore, moving slowly along the coast. Above them gulls, beneath them dolphins, around them larger fish. The anchovy at the center of this system, like plankton in the ocean, it holds everything else together. Bottlenose dolphins along the Caucasian Black Sea coast hunt near shores, leap from the water, chase fish into the shallows. Tourists on the shore photograph them for hours. These are not circus or tame animals, but wild dolphins that simply live here. The Black Sea bottlenose dolphin population is distinct from the Mediterranean. These animals have lived for millennia in colder and less salty water and differ somewhat from their Mediterranean relatives. The Caspian Sea, on the other side of the Caucasus, is an entirely different world. It is the world's largest enclosed sea, or the world's largest lake, depending on which definition one uses. Its fauna is unique. The Caspian seal breeds along the Azerbaijani shores. The Caspian lamprey, a relic that outlived the dinosaurs, ascends rivers to spawn. The beluga, sturgeon, stellate sturgeon, and ship sturgeon, all Caspian fish, developing for millions of years in isolation from the world's oceans. Their numbers are now catastrophically small compared to what they were 100 years ago, but they are there. The Kura Delta and Kizilagak Bay in Azerbaijan are a key stopping point for birds along the entire West Asian flyway. Millions of birds from western Siberia, Kazakhstan, and the Russian Arctic fly southward across the Caucasus to Iran, India, Africa, and most stop here in the wetlands and shallows of Azerbaijan's Caspian coast. The Kizilagach Reserve is one of the finest birdwatching locations in the entire post-Soviet space. In autumn, several million birds may be present here simultaneously: Dalmatian pelicans, flamingos, cranes, and geese of 30 species. Flamingos on the Caspian are as unexpected as flamingos on the Kazakh steppe. Pink birds against gray-blue water, against a backdrop of reed beds in distant Caucasian mountains. This is not Africa and not Spain. This is Azerbaijan, the Caspian Sea, October. Flamingos stop here on migration and sometimes winter if the winter is mild. There are not thousands of them, as on the Kazakhstani lakes, a few hundred. But even a few hundred is enough to stand and watch for a long time. And above the mountains, in the sky, lives a bird that few people know about. The largest raptor in the Caucasian sky feeds on what all others discard. Armenia, with its high-altitude steppes and semi-deserts, is a place where Caucasian nature meets Middle Eastern. The Armenian hoopoe, Armenian gull, and Caucasian black grouse are endemic species found nowhere outside the region. In Armenian gorges, raptors circle: bearded vulture, Egyptian vulture, griffon vulture. A bird with a wingspan of up to centimeters feeds exclusively on bones. The bearded vulture picks up a bone, ascends to great height, and drops it onto rocks until it shatters. Then it eats the marrow. This specialization is so narrow that even its stomach acid is extraordinary. It dissolves bone within a few hours. Nature devised this solution millions of years before humans invented the hammer. The bearded vulture has a small head, a long neck, and a wedge-shaped tail. In flight, it glides above the ridges with infrequent wing beats, using thermal updrafts above the cliffs. This is an evolutionary niche that no other creature in the Caucasian mountains has occupied, and the bearded vulture has occupied it completely. The griffon vulture circles above Armenian and Georgian mountains in large groups, sometimes dozens of birds in a single thermal updraft. They search for dead turs, deer, and livestock. Their role in the mountain ecosystem is enormous. They remove carrion quickly and efficiently, preventing the spread of disease. The griffin's bare head is not a defect or disfigurement, but an adaptation. Feathers would become soaked in blood when the bird plunges its head inside a carcass, while bare skin cleans more easily. A hygienic solution arrived at by nature millions of years ago. The Egyptian vulture in the Caucasus is smaller than the bearded vulture, white with a yellow face. It feeds on what remains on bones after the larger scavengers. It arrives in the Caucasus in summer and departs to Africa in winter. Its presence here is part of a global system. The bird spends winter south of the Sahara and summer in the mountains of the Caucasus. Several thousand kilometers is its ordinary annual route. The white-tailed eagle on the lakes and rivers of the Caucasus is a fisherman with an enormous wingspan. It perches on a branch above water and waits, then dives with talons forward and snatches the fish. Its toes lock onto the catch automatically. It cannot unclench them until it has landed. This means that if the fish turns out to be too heavy, the eagle cannot let go and drags it to shore across the water's surface, rowing with its wings. This looks clumsy and extraordinary at the same time. Georgian Tusheti is one of the wildest corners of the entire Caucasus. This is a high mountain district in northeastern Georgia, accessible by a single road over the Abano Pass, open only a few months a year. The rest of the time, Tusheti is cut off by snow, and it is precisely because of this that its nature has been so well preserved. Human pressure is minimal for most of the year. Turs graze there, bears walk, wolves live. The spruce and pine forests are so untouched they can seem primeval. Subalpine meadows with flowers that no one tramples, because there are almost no tourists. Tusheti is what the entire Caucasus was like a few centuries ago. Borjumi Gorge in central Georgia is a conifer forest in the deep gorge of the Kura River. In the Borjumi Karagali Reserve stands one of the largest conifer forests on the South Caucasus. Pine, spruce, and fir on the slopes. Bears, wolves, lynx, and deer in the forest. The river flows at the bottom of the gorge, cold and swift, with willows and alders along the banks. Higher up the slope, broadleaf forest transitions to conifer, and higher still, subalpine. All of this across a few kilometers of vertical distance. Borjomi Gorge is a perfect cross-section of Caucasian nature from river bottom to ridge. The fish of the Caucasian mountain rivers are above all trout. The Caucasian stream trout lives in clean, cold, fast-flowing rivers where the water is saturated with oxygen, and temperature, even in summer, does not rise above 18 degrees Celsius. It cannot tolerate pollution. Where trout are present, the water is clean. Where they are absent, something is wrong with the water. Another living indicator, like the gentian in the meadow or the grayling in the Urals. The Black Sea trout, also called the Black Sea salmon, ascends to spawn in the mountain rivers of the Caucasus, just as the Atlantic salmon ascends the rivers of Norway or the Kola Peninsula. The fish moves from the sea into freshwater rivers, surmounts rapids and waterfalls, spawns, and dies. Its body fertilizes the river and the bankside forest. Marine nutrients enter the mountain ecosystem through spawning salmon, a connection between sea and mountains that has operated for millions of years and is severed by dams and pollution. The dry eastern Greater Caucasus, Dagestan, Chechnya, Ingushetia, part of Azerbaijan, differs from the humid west as steppe differs from forest. Here there is less precipitation, less forest, more open slopes and cliffs. Here live Caucasian agamas, large lizards that bask on rocks and retreat into crevices at danger. Here the imperial eagle nests on scattered trees in the foothill steppes. Here steppe patches with great bustard and little bustard survive, though they are becoming fewer. The Samur forest in southern Dagestan is the only liana forest in Russia. Lianas, ivy, clematis, and wild grape entwine trees from root to crown. Beneath the canopy, it is moist and dark. This is the northernmost fragment of the Colchic forest, severed from the main massif. It exists here because the Samur River carries moisture from the mountains, creating a unique microclimate along its banks. The Samur forest is an island surrounded by steppe and semi-desert. Small, vulnerable, like nothing else. Bats in the caves of the Caucasus are a subject often passed over in popular accounts of the region's nature. Undeservedly so. The Caucasus is home to several dozen species of bats, many of which roost in caves. In some caves of Georgia and Armenia, hundreds of thousands of individuals winter. Bats consume insects in enormous quantities, including agricultural pests. A single individual destroys several hundred insects in a night: mosquitoes, moths, beetles. A colony of 1,000 animals is several 100,000 insects per day. Biological pest control on a scale that no pesticide can match in effectiveness per unit area. Behind all this living world stands a protection system, not perfect, but operating for a century already. The Caucasian Reserve in Russia, founded in 1924, is one of the oldest in the country. It preserved what would long since have disappeared without it: wisent bison, leopard, golden eagle, lynx, bear. All of this exists in the reserve because years ago, people made the decision to fence off the land and leave it alone. The decision taken in 1924 still works. This is one of the most compelling arguments for nature reserves in general. We see the result years later, and it is good. The Caucasus ranks among the world's 25 biological hotspots. This is an official designation given to places of exceptional biodiversity that are at the same time under serious threat. Hotspot status is not a compliment to nature. It is a warning to people, a rich place losing its wealth faster than it can study it. The Caucasus earned this designation in both senses simultaneously. An enormous number of endemic species, and a significant portion of their habitat already destroyed or under pressure. Spring in the Caucasus is not one event but a series, unfolding from bottom to top along the slopes over several months. In February and March, snowdrops bloom at the foot of the mountains, while the summits are still under winter snow. In April, wild pears and apple trees flower in the foothill forests. In May, rhododendron at middle elevations. In June, alpine meadows. In July, the highest elevation flowers at the edge of snowfields. If you move upward following the bloom, you can observe an unbroken spring for the months in succession, simply ascending a few hundred meters every few weeks. A journey through seasons without changing geography. The Greater Ridge has around no glaciers, and all of them are now retreating. This is visible even without specialist measurements. Where there was ice a few decades ago, now there is bare rock, polished by the glacier to a shine and abandoned. These fresh rock surfaces, not yet covered in moss or lichen, are a visual chronicle of retreat. On Elbrus, the snow line has risen several hundred meters over the last 1,000 years. The Bezenji Glacier, one of the largest in the Caucasus, has become significantly shorter than it was at the start of the 20th century. When glaciers shrink, rivers receive less water in summer. Gradually, year by year, almost imperceptibly, the high-altitude lakes of the Caucasus each have their own character. Lake Ritsa in Abkhazia is a mountain lake in a deep gorge, surrounded by fir forests. Its water is blue-green from the suspension of fine particles carried by mountain rivers. In winter, it does not freeze completely. It is too deep. In summer, it warms only near the surface. Paravani in Georgia is entirely different. A high-altitude volcanic lake on an open plateau, swept by wind through and through, shallow and dark. In summer, thousands of waterfowl nest on its shores. In winter, it freezes solid. In spring, when the ice first breaks up, the ducks return first, sometimes before the entire surface has cleared. Cold does not stop them. Climate change in the Caucasus is not a future threat, but a current reality, observable right now. The snow line is rising, glaciers are retreating, spring arrives 2 weeks earlier than in the mid-20th century. This shifts the timing of flowering, insect emergence, and bird arrival. If a flower opens earlier and the bee arrives on the old schedule, they will not meet. If a bird arrives at its nesting ground and the insects have already laid their eggs and died, there is nothing to feed the chicks. This is not a one-year catastrophe. It is pressure accumulating year by year. Altitudinal zonation in the Caucasus is shifting upward. Each zone moves slowly several meters higher every few years. The forest zone climbs into the subalpine into the alpine. The alpine shrinks because above it lies only rock and ice. Species bound to the alpine belt, the Caucasian black grouse, the Caucasian tur, specific alpine plants, find themselves on an ever smaller area. This is slow. It is not visible year to year, but over several decades it becomes apparent. The Caucasian black grouse is a bird that lives only here and nowhere else. The black male with red eyebrows and white wing bars displays on alpine meadows in spring. Its voice, a bubbling and hissing that carries through the gorges. Females, brown and inconspicuous, fly in to choose a mate. The grouse is tied to the alpine belt. It feeds on bilberry shoots, berries, and insects. Below, forest, where it is uncomfortable. Above, snow and rock. It literally has only a few hundred meters of vertical space in which it can exist, which makes it extraordinarily vulnerable to any change, climatic or human-caused. The bearded vulture is the largest raptor in the skies above the Caucasus, with a wingspan of up to centimeters. It resembles neither an eagle nor a raven. It has its own distinctive form, small head, long neck, wedge-shaped tail. In flight, it glides above the ridges with infrequent wing beats, using thermal updrafts above the cliffs. Its specialization, bones. It drops them from height onto rocks and eats the marrow. Its intestine, nearly half a meter long, is adapted for processing bones. Stomach acid dissolves bone within a few hours. An evolutionary niche occupied by no other creature in the Caucasian mountains, and the bearded vulture has occupied it completely. The volcanic plateau of Armenia, Aragats, the Zangezur Range, landscapes utterly unlike what most people expect from the Caucasus. Open, wind-swept highlands at 2,000 to 3,000 meters. Alpine meadows, green in summer, buried under deep snow in winter. Mountain lakes, Arpi, Igerlich, dark and cold. Ducks, grebes, and waders nest along the shores. Raptors circle above. This is not exotic, it is ordinary mountain life, simply on the Armenian plateau rather than in the Alps. The mountain rivers of the Caucasus, Terek, Kuban, Rioni, Kura, Arax, are dynamic systems that define life both in the mountains and on the plains simultaneously. In the upper reaches, cold, transparent, swift, with trout and minnow. In the middle course, powerful, turbid in flood, with barbel and chub. In the lower course, wide, slow, with silver carp and common carp. One river, 3 different aquatic worlds, each with its own species and its own ecosystem. The spring flood on the mountain rivers of the Caucasus is experienced by the people living along these rivers as an elemental force. Snow melts in the mountains and the rivers rise several meters in a few days. The Terek in April and May is a completely different river from what it is in August. A powerful, turbid, roaring torrent carrying trees, boulders, everything that has entered the water. Then the flood recedes as quickly as it came. Banks are covered in deposited silt, in which seeds of plants carried from the headwaters lie waiting. Within a few weeks, there is green in bloom. Forest fires in the Caucasus have grown more serious in recent years. Warmer and drier summers, accumulated dead wood, wind, and fire moves up the slopes faster than before. Fires have always occurred here, but when they become more intense and more frequent, forest recovery cannot keep pace with the losses. Caucasian forest recovers more slowly than Siberian larch because it is a complex ecosystem of long-lived species. Beech lives 300 years, fir 400. They can be destroyed in a few hours and take a century to grow again. The thermal springs of the Caucasus are a phenomenon connected to the geological youth of the ridge. The mountains are young. Volcanic activity, though waning, is not zero. Kislovodsk, Pyatigorsk, Essentuki, Borjomi, Tskaltubo, outlets of groundwater heated by geothermal energy and saturated with dissolved minerals. These springs create a microclimate around themselves, small areas where ground temperature is higher than it should be at a given elevation. There are different plants, different insects, sometimes species that should not be at this altitude. Small natural anomalies produced by geology. The snakes of the Caucasus are a subject people tend to avoid, though without them the picture is incomplete. Several species of viper live here, including the Caucasian viper and Kaznikov's viper, a vivid creature with a pattern in red and orange tones. A beautiful snake, genuinely beautiful. It can be encountered on mountain meadows and rocky slopes. It is not aggressive. When meeting a human, it prefers to retreat rather than attack. A bite is only possible when it is stepped on or picked up. Snakes in the Caucasus perform an important role, regulating the numbers of mice and voles. Without this control, they would destroy grain stores and damage plant roots. A snake in a mountain meadow is not a threat, but a part of the system. The bezoar ibex on the cliffs of Armenia and Azerbaijan is the ancestor of every domestic goat in the world. Genetic studies have shown that it was precisely this animal that was domesticated in the Middle East some 10,000 years ago. A wild goat with long, saber-shaped horns walks the same cliffs its ancestors walked long before humans. It is cautious. Hearing a sound, it freezes and watches. Then, in a fraction of a second, it decides to hide or to run. And it runs across the cliffs in a way that no vehicle can follow. The protected areas of the Caucasus are a mosaic of nature reserves, national parks, and wildlife sanctuaries across the region. In Russia, the Caucasian Reserve, Teberdinsky, Kabardino-Balkarsky. In Georgia, Borjomi Karagali, Lagodeki, Kolketi. In Armenia, Dilijan, Khosrov. In Azerbaijan, Zakatala, Shirvan, Kizilagach. Each preserves something of its own. Together they form a network that, for all its incompleteness, works. The animals living in these reserves do not recognize national borders. A bear from the Caucasian Reserve can walk into Georgia. A wolf from Georgia can walk into Armenia. Reserves on different sides of borders are de facto a single ecosystem. Transboundary cooperation in protecting Caucasian nature is a complex subject because the political relations between countries in the region are not simple. Armenia and Azerbaijan, conflict. Russia and Georgia, tension. Abkhazia, unrecognized status. In this reality, speaking about joint conservation programs means speaking about something that requires political will, which is often absent. And yet nature does not wait for politicians to agree. The Persian leopard does not know where Russia ends and Georgia begins. Migratory birds cross all borders without visas. Tourism in the Caucasus is a growing factor. In Georgia, tourism has multiplied several times over the past 2 decades. In Russia's Elbrus area, ski resorts are expanding. In Armenia, interest in ecotourism is growing. Tourism indirectly generates resources for nature protection through the economic interest of local residents in preserving natural sites. But tourism also destroys trails, noise, litter, disturbance to animals. This is a balance that must be sought consciously. Where it is not sought, nature loses. A tur in the mountains in November is already a different animal from its summer self. Its winter coat has grown in. The male's horns have reached maximum development after several years of growth. November is the rut. Males descend toward the females, bellow, display their horns, sometimes fight. After the rut, in winter, turs keep to south-facing slopes, where snow is shallower and food is easier to reach. They paw through the snow, reaching the dry grass beneath it. In particularly severe winters, when snow is deep and compacted, some turs die. This is a normal part of mountain life. Every winter is selection. Caucasian nature exists in spite. In spite of densely populated foothills, in spite of centuries of mountain pasture use, in spite of wars and political upheavals, of which this region has seen more than anywhere, in spite of poaching, logging, river pollution, in spite of the box tree moth and retreating glaciers, it exists. Because mountains are complex and difficult to reach. Because nature is resilient where it is left alone. Because a few dozen people, rangers, scientists, local residents, in each generation do what they believe to be right, even when it is hard and poorly paid. The Caucasus from the air on a summer day, green, blue, white. Green forests on the slopes, blue rivers in the gorges, white glaciers on the peaks. From the ground it is the scent of rhododendron, the sound of a mountain river, the track of a tur in snow, the shadow of a bearded vulture on a cliff. It is a brown bear crossing a subalpine meadow in the early morning, not knowing it is being watched. It is a roe deer standing at a forest edge and looking before going into the trees. It is trout in a clear stream. It is the blue gentian against a white snowfield. The Caucasus is a place that deserves far more attention than it receives. Not as a ski resort, not as a tourist route, but as one of the last points on the map of Eurasia where nature has preserved something close to its historical condition. Turs still walk cliffs that remember the time before humans. Migratory birds still fly routes established long before national borders existed. Plants that survived the Ice Age and everything that came after still flower there. Please tell us in the comments how you found this story. It genuinely matters to me to know whether it moved you. Do you think it is worth spending this much effort and money to bring back into the wild species that we ourselves erased, such as the Persian leopard and the Caucasian bison? And one more thing. Do you prefer watching the footage horizontal or vertical for mobile?